Hey everyone, this is Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen. Thank you for joining today's webinar on generative artificial intelligence and the threats to democracy. We're going to have, I think, an exciting and engaging panel and set of conversations for the next hour and a half that should alert you to some risks that are coming at us fast and offer some solutions about what we can do to mitigate, address, prevent those risks. I think we can say this about generative artificial intelligence. There is an awful lot we don't know. There's an awful lot that we, the regular people, the public, don't know about it, but there's an awful lot that technologists and the experts and the companies pushing out generative AI don't know. They don't know how generative AI creates specific content. They know the whole general system, but they don't know how a particular thing emerges in response to your prompt. None of us know how the technology is going to evolve. And there are huge debates among companies and inventors and academics about the likely future scenarios for generative AI. We also don't know about all kinds of risks. There are some extraordinary science fiction sounding risks that lots of people in the industry take very seriously. We don't really know how likely those are. We also don't know what we don't know. As the technology evolves, it's for sure that we're going to be presented with all kinds of challenges that we've never encountered before, and will call on us to make decisions through frameworks that we've never really had before. But we don't really know what all those things are. That said, there's a lot that we do know about generative AI, and today's session is focused much more on things that we do know. Because in the here and now, or the very near-term future, we can identify a range of very serious risks societally, but specifically as regards the functioning of our democracy. These relate to things regarding election administration, the way campaigns are conducted, what people believe to be true, how they get access to information, and how they're able to assess the validity of that information. These are identifiable risks. They're here and now or soon coming and highly likely to occur. I think one takeaway from that is that we can't wait to address these risks. We can't wait for the problems to emerge and become so certain that we're living with them before we proactively work to prevent them. We also can't wait to figure out perfect solutions. We're in many ways, an area of the unknown. We're going to be able to draw on lots of historical experience, but we're dealing with things that are new and novel. And we're going to have to try our best, because the alternative is to twiddle our thumbs, searching for a perfect solution, which may or may not exist, but let things spin out of control in the meantime. So today's session is designed to delve into some of these risks, the here and now risks, or the very near risks, and to figure out what we can do about it. I think we're going to have an extraordinary conversation, and hopefully an activating conversation for all of us, because we do need to take action proactively to deal with these issues. Here's the plan for today's event. I'm going to hand this over in a minute to our co-hosting organization and its CEO, Nick Penniman, CEO and founder of Issue One. Nick's going to offer some opening remarks. He will then introduce Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, who will join us, who will give us some remarks. After Representative Buck, we'll go to a panel conversation, which will be facilitated by Lisa Gilbert from Public Citizen. That's going to give us a chance to have different perspectives on the challenges of AI and democracy, a little bit of a conversation among the panelists, and a conversation with you all as well. Sometime in the course of that conversation, hopefully at the end, but it could happen any time, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota will join us. We'll pause at that moment and hear from her, and then we'll close out the session. So that's the plan. Thank you very much for joining. We've got huge interest in this. It is hugely important. And again, as I hope it's both informative for everybody, engaging for everybody and activating for everybody. So with that, let me pass it over to Nick Penniman, who's the founder and CEO of Issue One. Prior to founding Issue One, which is some time ago, Nick's been involved in all kinds of cool entities and enterprises, running or helping run or help found or playing key roles in the Alliance for Democracy, the Schuman Center for Media Democracy, the American Prospect, and the Huffington Post Investigative Fund. And we're glad that Nick brings his journalistic chops, but is now firmly enmeshed in the advocacy side, helping drive forward the fight for democracy. Nick, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rob. It's an honor to partner with you guys on this. It is something that obviously there's kind of widespread concern about in society, and especially as we know in the democracy community. So thanks for all your leadership. In a world already awash in false information and increasing tribalism, unregulated AI will make governing democratic societies much harder and will strengthen the power of authoritarians in years to come. One of the greatest powers of large language model-driven AI is how authoritative the content is. When it comes to false information, we at Issue One are particularly concerned in the near term about election-related disinformation. So imagine this. Days before the 2024 presidential election, millions of voters, especially in swing states, will receive deceptive robocalls from AI-generated Joe Biden's or Donald Trump's, telling them that they have to vote elsewhere, or saying that if they show up and vote and haven't paid their utility bills, they'll be fined or maybe even arrested on the spot. Imagine the same from very convincing fake news websites that will be created from scratch in hours and then distributed into people's social media feeds in seconds. The possibilities for spreading lies are endless, and they extend, of course, not just to voting, but to the vote counting process as well. The other power of LLM-driven AI is how conversational and persuasive they can be. The bots of old were one-way producers of lies. The new ones cajole people. They morph in real time. They adapt the mannerisms of the people they're conversing with, and they fabricate information or hallucinate to bolster their assertions and convince people of their falsehoods with ease. These attributes will be particularly useful for bad actors in the post-election period, for those who might try to discredit the integrity of the vote counts. It will be incredibly destabilizing. Foreign adversaries and domestic antagonists seeking to undermine our democracy have never had such powerful tools for societal disruption at their fingertips. And we've already heard from election officials at all levels who are deeply concerned about the impact on their already stressed staffs. Here's the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way. And we need to act quickly. Never before has there been a more harmful, reckless introduction of a technology into the marketplace than we've seen with AI. Imagine if months after dynamite was created, it was being distributed instantaneously and for free to every home in the world. That's what we've seen with the recent release of generative AI. That's why we at Issue One, along with our bipartisan National Council on Election Integrity and our Council for Responsible Social Media, have been calling on Congress to adopt responsible safeguards to protect our democracy and our national security in the near term, and begin holding thoughtful but aggressive and active and dynamic hearings about what to do in the long term. It's time for Congress to play a strong role and an immediate role here. In the coming months, we need better tools in place to stop bad actors and ensure election officials have the resources they need to administer next year's election safely and securely. In the long term, we have to actively, smartly regulate this technology as its creators are urging us to do before it runs out of control. Our next speaker can offer insights into the work that's taking place on Capitol Hill right now to address the harms of AI and protect our national security. Congressman Ken Buck from Colorado has already been working on these issues, talking about these issues in meaningful and bipartisan ways, and we're very fortunate to have him join us today. So please welcome to the screen Congressman Buck. And I think we were told that Congressman Buck might be a couple minutes late. So do we have a bead on Congressman Buck at this point?
He should be coming from votes.
Okay.
I think we can talk a little bit further about the impact on elections with Rob, or Lisa can make a call.
It works for you, Nick and Rob, to chat for just a couple more minutes.
Yeah, sure.
And then launching into the panel.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
Nick, I thought that was great. Actually, not just saying it for our audience. Let me ask you to elaborate on that scenario you were laying out about sort of combination of different technology, different forms of media coming at people, all from generative AI.
Well, let me give you a simple example. So, listen, we know that it's amazing at creating audio. It can fake audio within 3 seconds of getting someone's recording. So even Wesley Wilcox here, it's possible that Wesley's got, there are videos of him out there. So someone could take 3 seconds, 5 seconds of Wesley's voice and produce Wesley in audio or possibly even in video and begin distributing that to people in Wesley's county, saying that, they can no longer vote where they thought they could vote, or saying that if they show up and vote, try to vote and they've got, as I said, outstanding speeding tickets or unpaid utility bills, that they'll be fined or arrested, or they'll be denied their ability to vote. So the possibilities are endless when it comes to audio and video manipulation. But the other really striking thing, and I don't know if you all saw this, but when they released GPT-4 at the press conference, the guy who released GPT-4 pulled a piece of paper off the podium. He drew wireframes on that piece of paper for a website that he wanted created. He then named the website. He scribbled the name of the website. He took a picture of that piece of paper with his cell phone, fed it into GPT-4 and said, "Make me this website." He then continued his presentation, and about 5 or 7 minutes later, he checked back with GPT-4, and there was a live website on the internet, not just on GPT-4 servers, on the internet, that had been already populated with news content, right? In quotes, news content. So we're talking, setting up, establishing entire websites within 5 to 7 minutes. And what will likely happen, so just imagine you're in Milwaukee, right? So all of a sudden, something like the Milwaukee Post will be created. It'll look like a totally legitimate news site. It'll have hundreds of stories, in fact, that will be summarized versions of AP stories that will seem and feel like real news. But then it'll have one story in it that's completely false and has been totally fabricated. And it's about, how all the polling places in Milwaukee have been moved. Big headline, go look at this to find your new place. Then what will happen is that website will be pumped into people's Facebook feeds, Instagram feeds, Twitter feeds. Alert, your polling place has been moved. Check the Milwaukee Post to find out more. When people go to that site, they'll read that article and they'll say, "Whoa, wait, what is crazy?" Then they'll click around and say, "Is this real?" And everything around that article will look real and will actually be factual because it'll be summarizing other news stories. That's what we're going to see out there. And the election officials that we have talked to don't have any capacity to deal with this.
I think that tees it up great for our next panel. So we're told that Representative Buck has another vote, so he'll join when he can, but we're going to pass it over to the panel. And I'll just say before I hand it over to my colleague, Lisa Gilbert, that the things you identified just now are going to be elaborated in even more frightening detail by our extraordinary panelists. And let me bump it over to you, Lisa.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Lisa.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. That was fantastic. Hello, Representative Buck. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Ken, this is Nick Penniman. Good to see you again. Zach works with us at Issue One daily, and I know he helped recruit you to this. So I think he is in the audience. But what we've talked about, Congressman, in the last 10 minutes or so is really the potential for false information to be put out there very quickly by these large language models when it comes to election related information, like where to vote and how to vote. And then also about the kind of incredible persuasive capacity of these large language models and their ability to kind of convince people of things that they want to convince them of, whether those things are true or not. And also their ability to kind of self-replicate and just create more of themselves and more of their false information very, very quickly, and in an incredibly persuasive way. So, what we're focused on is kind of the integrity of the upcoming elections and especially the ability and interest of foreign adversaries like Russia and China and Iran to leverage these large language models to kind of mess with not just the elections, where and how people vote, but also mess with the story about the vote counting and the vote tabulating, and just try to gum up the works.
Sure. Well, thanks, Nick. I appreciate that. I think that Russia obviously did that. We had the Mueller investigation as a result of what Russia was involved in, and the Senate held a hearing, and I understand they identified 30 different elections around the world where Russia spent just enough money to make people think that it influenced an election so that it could undermine really the confidence that America or other countries have in elections. And that's certainly something that they will continue to do, and they will do even better with AI. And so I don't think they will actually hack into election systems and change election results. But I think they will do everything they can to undermine Americans' confidence in elections. I was asking about Zach Blom earlier, Nick, because as a candidate, my major concern is how does AI, if you've got an AI model for a fraction of the cost right now to reach out to voters, you can identify voters. Karl Rove had a theory that pickup drivers with a gun rack in the back are Republican voters. So he looked on the websites, the public information databases for every pickup owner in Ohio State, and then gun owner, and cross-referenced those and came up with this group. And he was going to target those folks for a get out the vote effort. Well, the reality now with AI is you can do that in a few seconds, and you can then, for a very, very low cost, send out emails based on cross-referencing with another database. And the ability, whether you're putting out good information about yourself or whether a third party is putting out a complete lie about a candidate, the ability to influence voters, I think, has increased dramatically as a result of AI. I don't think that obviously they will be hacking the countries that you mentioned, and I would add North Korea to that category, will be hacking in our financial system in a much more with much more effectiveness. And at the same time, hopefully our financial systems and the government systems will use AI to prevent that from happening. But I don't know whether they or any particular group in America will try to hack into, more effectively hack into a Secretary of State or clerk and recorder's website. It's just unclear to me how AI can be used in some ways at this point. And it's why I joined a bill to form a commission in Congress. One of the mistakes we made with the internet was we got the internet up and running. We had some good rules around the internet, and then Congress stopped looking at it and didn't give regulators updated authority to deal with the harms that everybody was witnessing on the internet. And then it became very difficult because these companies got so large and so powerful and so wealthy that they really control the political system as they do now. And a lot of those companies are the companies who are developing this AI. And so that is real danger, that we won't have the flexibility over years that we need to regulate AI.
Congressman, do you worry about deep fakes? Images of you out there doing things you never did or saying things you never said?
Well, it happens now, and I'm sure it will happen in the future. I don't know if I enjoy the images of me doing some of these things that I didn't do, but I am always fascinated by what politicians actually do, and we've heard of some of those examples recently, and then being able to create something. But yeah, I think that when people see something with their own eyes, they don't necessarily question the veracity of it. They just assume, I just saw this video of this politician engaging in this act, and so they assume that video is real. And obviously AI can create something like that in a heartbeat and send that out. So yes, I think that false information in a variety of ways will increase as a result of AI.
Yeah. And then what do you think, this is a question from one of our audience members, what do you think the prospects are for AI election protection legislation in the House this year or next? Senate Majority Leader Schumer has identified election security as a priority, immediate priority for AI legislation in his chamber. What are you hearing on the House side, Congressman Buck? Because, they're obviously, Rob, you missed it, but what Rob Weissman at Public Citizen said is that we've got kind of short-term needs here and then longer-term needs around thinking about how to regulate, smartly regulate AI. The short-term needs really are very pressing about the 2024 election. So are you hearing and seeing enough bipartisan energy in the House around election-related legislation as it relates to AI?
Yeah, here's the issue, Nick. The Constitution very clearly says that state legislatures will determine the manner and means of elections, both for the state as well as for the federal government. AI is an application that will impact the world. So it's not just Ohio being impacted by AI. So the federal government should have a role in how we deal with AI in the election area, but we should not interfere with the state's responsibilities to determine the elections, the rules around the elections, the protections around the elections. If it's a foreign threat, that's something the federal government should take care of. If it is the integrity of election within a state, that's not. And we've gotten into a lot of issues recently on the federal side about how much can the federal government interfere with the state running their elections. I think there's a lot of us, both in the House and Senate, who are very reluctant to get involved in state elections.
Yeah, and we agree that no one wants to nationalize the elections or federalize.
Not true. There are people that want to nationalize the elections.
Sorry, on this call. Call. But the question is, if you ended up with a 50 different, when it comes to advanced AI, if you ended up with 50 different state regulatory regimes, some good, some bad, some maybe non-existent, around AI, given the fact that AI is on the internet, right? That it's not geographically bound, and that it is a problem that we all are facing all of a sudden because of how reckless these companies have been. It seems as if there needs to be some kind of a federal response to it.
I agree with that,
to help people deal with it. So that's I think the question is whether or not Congress can help guide that federal response while fully empowering and assisting and being deferential to the states and state election leaders.
So I think when you're talking about the security side of things, Congress should absolutely get involved, and we should deal with foreign threats as well as domestic threats to the security of elections. When it deals with how many weeks should we have before mail-in ballots go in, federal government should not get involved, as well as so many other issues that have been left to the state legislatures. But I agree with you. AI is an international, a global issue, and we're going to have to deal with that at the federal level.
That's right. Congressman, do you have any final thoughts? Because I know that Lisa's come on to kick off our panel.
She's the hook, it looks like.
Exactly.
No, I appreciate you having this discussion, and actually would love if you could interact with my staff so that we could learn more of the things that you're learning and bring some best practices to this. Ted, Lou, and I are working really hard together on trying to get this right, and obviously elections is one of the big issues. So thank you for having me.
Well, great, Congressman. And you should know that the work that we're doing on this is being generated from the bottom up. It's from election officials up who are asking for help at this point from Congress, red states, blue states, Republicans, Democrats alike. And that's what the panel is going to be about in part. So, Lisa, I will hand it over to you. And thank you so much, Congressman Buck.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Congressman. Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to jump back to reintroduce our first panelist, as I worry his bio got truncated. So our first panelist is Wesley Wilcox. Wesley serves as the Supervisor of Elections for Marion County, Florida. He was first elected in 2012, and he has over 32 years of experience in the elections industry, has a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and he's been inducted into the Election Center Hall of Fame. I'll just introduce all the panelists and then have you begin, Wesley. Following Wesley, we'll have EAC Commissioner Thomas Hicks. Commissioner Hicks was confirmed in 2014. Prior to his appointment to the EAC, he ran the House Administration Committee staff from 2003 to 2014, working on campaign finance, election reform, contested elections, and oversight of the EAC and the FEC. Commissioner Hicks received his JD from Catholic University. Following Commissioner Hicks, will go to Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen, who you've already met. He's also joining our panel as an expert. Before joining Public Citizen, Rob worked as director of the corporate accountability organization Essential Action. Prior to that, he was the editor of the Multinational Monitor and a public interest attorney at the Center for Study of Responsive Law. He received his JD from Harvard Law. And then our final panelist is Matt Skibinski. Matt is the general manager of NewsGuard, a company that deploys journalists to combat misinformation by rating the credibility of over 30,000 news sources based on journalistic criteria. Prior to joining NewsGuard, when it was founded in 2018, Matt has spent his career at the intersection of journalism and digital media as a local news reporter, as the head of operations for a startup that helps thousands of news publishers monetize content, and acting as an advisor for the nonprofit Lenfest Institute for Journalism. So august bios, incredible panel. So excited we're able to jump into it. And I want to hand it to Wesley first for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank Representative Buck for appearing with us this morning. I know we're running a little bit behind on time frame, so I'm going to kind of truncate some of my opening remarks. And we've been asked about concerns, and therefore I'm going to kind of abbreviate them a little bit. A couple of our concerns are actually three that just come to the top of my head. First off is the exponential growth of AI is a real concern. It feels like we've come a long way in a very short time frame. If you're familiar with Moore's law, which is simply that computing power will double every 2 years, it seems like the technology behind AI is even more accelerated than that. What were telltale signs of a deep fake or generative information just a short time ago, AI, by virtue of itself, has figured out and learned how not to do those things that give us clues that it was generated information. And that's deeply concerning. Second concern that I have, although currently the vast majority of the AI has been targeted to either, false, as it relates to this, false images, or maybe even just accurate information on some other levels, I believe we're just beginning to see AI used in a different way, and which is to provide on the surface reasonable but foundationally wrong information. For the last few years, we as election officials, we've dealt with videos and reports that start from a valid or an accurate spot, but make wrong conclusion, either on purpose or just due to a lack of knowledge. A couple of examples, there's video showing some normal election tabulation process, but the narrative voice is depicting that some sinister action is actually taking place when it's nothing more than standard operating procedure inside each and every elections office. You also see where they've taken pieces of data on a report that's being interpreted inaccurately by individuals. But these current examples take time to develop and disseminate. But I can see AI creating them in an overwhelming number, and unfortunately a very short amount of time, as I think it was Nick, maybe it was Rob, that mentioned, you know, just generating a new website in 5 to 7 minutes full of content. And so doing this on the election side of this is deeply troubling. And then the final concern of mine, and although technically and singly not driven by AI, my by far biggest concern is, when do our election officials say, that's enough, I'm done? My colleagues and I are continuing to ask to do more, know more, prove more. Please, you know, I don't want you to interpret this as whining, because yes, I'm an elected official. I signed up for this. And although I've been in the election profession for over 30 years, supervisor for almost 11 years, a lot has changed in those last 11 years. In 2012, when I was first elected, the hats that were required to be worn by a supervisor were, in those days, far more than anyone in the general public knew. But the increase in those number of hats in the last few years has been almost overwhelming. I know for a fact, before November 2024, this profession is going to lose an extraordinary amount of institutional knowledge due to early retirements and resignations. And who's going to step in to fill those shoes? That should be a concern, because will it be someone who, although well-intentioned, just doesn't possess the knowledge to make the correct decision? Or worse, will it be somebody who intentionally makes the wrong decision? And into the near future, this knowledge loss is going to be even greater for those who just decide, I'm not running for re-election again. I'm done. I'll get through this. So those are the off the top of my head concerns, and I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel.
Thanks so much, Wesley. I want to hand it now to Commissioner Hicks.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning. I want to thank Public Citizen and Issue 1 for inviting me to join this panel on artificial intelligence and its potential impact on the 24 elections. Again, I'm Thomas Hicks, Commissioner with the United States Election Assistance Commission, also known as the EAC. And for those of you who are not familiar with the EAC, we are an independent, bipartisan federal agency devoted to the administration of elections. The FEC is our sister agency that deals with the financing of elections. We are the only federal agency solely focused on the administration of elections, and the EAC works with state and local election officials and officers to help administer safe, secure, accurate, and accessible elections. We also serve as a national clearinghouse of election information and uplifting trusted sources. As I've been traveling around this year and speaking with state and local election officials, AI has been a topic of discussion across the country. This is not a topic we can ignore. Many of us already use AI every day when we use our devices and engage online. How many of you have asked Siri or Alexa, run a Google search, or use Grammarly to check an email? However, with the advancements of AI technology, we've already seen increasingly sophisticated examples of mis, dis, and malinformation, especially those featuring alternate images of politicians, like the video of Congresswoman Pelosi in 2019. Much of the impact of artificial intelligence in 2024 will exacerbate existing issues related to communications and public confidence in elections. Even beyond the increasingly sophistication and widespread capability of producing potentially misleading content, AI technology can also fundamentally change how voters find important election information. Currently, online search engines direct the public to official election offices' websites or social media accounts. In the future, AI could bypass this step and provide the information voters are looking for directly through an AI chat feature. While this could make finding information easier, quality issues may arise with more inaccurate or misleading content in the digital ecosystem. However, while the volume and reach of AI-generated audio, images, and video content through social media and other media platforms will snowball, your local election officials are and will always be the best source of election information. Even as elections have been held in many communities, election officials have been thinking and preparing for the impact of AI it will have on 2024 and beyond. Proactive and consistent voter outreach, education, and engagement by election officials remains critical. These communications create a track record of being trustworthy and accurate sources of information, providing election administration and information when voters need it most. AI control or myth-busting pages from election offices will also be more important than ever to try to insulate against increasingly sophisticated and widespread misleading content. So why am I here? Because the EAC has produced several resources for election officials to proactively engage with their communities, including resources that can be customized to their specific needs to create clear, accurate, and timely messaging. This includes an AI toolkit for election officials that explains what artificial intelligence is, how it may affect election administration, communications, best practices, and examples, and a tailorable template for election offices to direct voters to official sources of important election information. We also created a Communications 101 toolkit for election offices to communicate with the public and plan for issues that may arise. This includes a social media calendar template, an example of press releases. The EAC is also election processes toolkits and quick start guides on specific election administration issues, which includes posters, pocket guides, and other resources. Election officials can customize these materials with information specific to their jurisdictions to help explain complicated processes like canvassing and certifying election results. AI will present another facet to the ongoing challenge for election officials to maintain the public's trust and confidence in our elections. However, we as the public must do our part as well and do what we can to verify sources and information, especially before we share these with our networks. Again, election offices are the most trusted sources of election information for our community, and we can directly engage with election processes and see how they are run by serving as a poll worker or election observer in your community. Again, I want to thank Public Citizen and Issue 1 for inviting me here today, and thank you, Lisa, for giving me 5 minutes to talk.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. I want to hand it over to Matt Skibinski for his remarks.
Great, thank you so much. Just to introduce myself, the organization I'm the general manager of, NewsGuard. We have a team of journalists who analyze news source credibility. We've rated about 30,000 sources based on apolitical journalistic criteria, and we track mis and disinformation, and we provide that data to tech companies, to help them make their products safe, and we do public reports and research to help inform everybody about the harms and risks from mis and disinformation. And we've done a lot of research over the past year and more about AI-related misinformation specifically, and so I'm just going to share some of what we've learned here and talk about the risks and the types of things we might see. So I do have some slides which I'll show quickly. I'm going to talk about 3 ways that we think AI will likely exacerbate election misinformation. One is that chat tools like ChatGPT and Bard, which are basically replacing search engines in a lot of contexts, are going to amplify misinformation that's already out there. State and non-state actors will use AI to amplify false narratives, and bad actors likely will use AI to create what I would call cheap fakes, which are, they don't even have to be a sophisticated video that's perfect, that is amazingly produced, but for very little time and effort, you can produce convincing, as Nick said, convincing local news publications, local news stories, audio files, and the like, that can be used, especially at the scale that you can reach with AI, can be used to really just wreak havoc in terms of trust in elections and integrity of specific outcomes in elections. So our team, first thing we did, we've done this a few times and updated this in August. We've been red teaming the major AI models that are out there, ChatGPT, Bard, as it pertains to misinformation, and just looking at how, if you just prompt them about topics that are related, that we know there's misinformation about that topic, how frequently do they return responses that repeat misinformation narratives that are out there? The results are not great. ChatGPT 4, 98% of the time that we prompted it with news topics related to misinformation, it repeated misinformation narratives back to us. For Bard, it was slightly better, about 80% of the time, but still not very good. And we put out that research last month. You can find it on the NewsGuard website. So this means that if there are election misinformation narratives out there, as there were in 2020, these tools that are increasingly integrated into products by the big tech companies are going to repeat them. And what's particularly concerning about that is if you're in a ChatGPT or a Bard, you don't really have any context on the source of the information. So you're just trusting Google or whoever that is correct. So you've really disintermediated the user from the source of the information. But beyond that, both models that were happy to help our researchers produce misinformation with specific prompts. And so here is ChatGPT writing an article about ballot counting and questioning the integrity of the 2020 election. It wrote a headline for us. It wrote a paragraph. Here's Bard making the argument that whoever has the most votes on election night should be the winner because of what it calls election irregularities and counting after election day. And even outside of elections, these tools, which you hear the tech companies talk a lot about guardrails that are in place. Well, we also very easily got them to claim that the Pulse Night club shooting in Orlando was a false flag, and that the Sandy Hook shooting was a false flag. For that one, ChatGPT actually even included a specific conspiracy theory about a particular victim, which I took their name out here. But this is not the result of a system that has strong guardrails in place to protect from being abused for this purpose. Foreign adversaries have already noticed this in a few contexts. Our team has put out reports in one case about Chinese state media and another case about Russian state media actually using screenshots and citing ChatGPT or products that use US-based LLMs, and they basically get the LLM to repeat a false narrative, and then they cite it and say, look, Google or Microsoft or whoever is saying this, it's not just us. In one case, a false claim about a biolab that the US is allegedly running in Kazakhstan to create bioweapons against China, and another promoting some Russian state media claims related to the war in Ukraine. So this is already happening in that sense. Now, I don't want to just make these hypothetical and screenshots, so I thought we could actually have ChatGPT write us some misinformation right now. So I already prompted it. I told it to pretend it's a writer for a local newspaper and to write an article after the 2024 election about voting irregularities. I'm just going to have it do the same thing for a Wisconsin newspaper called the Sheboygan News Index, which I made up. And let's see what it does. I got to get down to. So it writes a title. Unexpected ballot discovery sends shockwaves. It has an author's name. It has the newspaper. It has a dateline. This looks a lot like a real news article. It's talking about sizable numbers of discrepancies in ballots. It has an undisclosed source informing of a cache of ballot boxes. It's citing now a specific ballot box that's a cause for concern. That box contained 4,000 ballots, and a jaw-dropping 15,000 should have contained 4,000 ballots, and apparently had 15,000 ballots inside. And it's going to keep going. It's going to quote an election official, all sorts of things. And this article, reads like a local newspaper article. ChatGPT is going to write it. I'm not going to wait for it to finish just in the interest of time, but you can see, you could imagine somebody who wants to put this out there, having it do this for every single town in the state of Wisconsin. That's how I came up with this one, and create a fake news site for each one. And suddenly you've got an entire state disbelieving the results of an election. And the cost of this was my $15 a month ChatGPT premium subscription. So not exactly an expensive way to fake some news. Now, on that front, we are particularly concerned about that issue, fake local news sites. And that is because, number one, we've already seen the people abusing LLMs to create sites that look like local newspapers or other news sites. We call these UAINs, which stands for Unreliable AI Generated News. And these are really easy to make. Their number of them is increasing exponentially. A lot of them right now are just publishing light content and trying to get ad revenue from people clicking on them, but you can easily see how that will be adopted and may be adopted by people who want to spread misinformation in an election. And we know that because this is already happening in various contexts. So here I've got two local newspapers, both based in Philadelphia. One is called the Philadelphia Tribune, one is called the Philly Leader. And they both have headlines and ads and different sections that look like local news. If you're a user, you'd really have no way to tell which of these is a real newspaper and which is not a real newspaper and is run by a group that has a partisan agenda. Well, the one on the left, Philly Leader, is part of a network of sites that are almost identical. Much of their content is written automatically using AI, and that have published a lot of partisan narratives around elections. The one on the right, the Philly Tribune, has been around for a long time and describes itself as the oldest continuously publishing newspaper serving the African-American community in the country. But again, to a user who's just encountering this headline, you wouldn't know the difference. They both look like credible local news sites. So just imagine that article we just wrote on the Philly Leader or on a similar site appearing in your Facebook feed. And the last thing, just because Nick mentioned it in his intro, the idea of robocalls on election day, that's not just hypothetical. When we were talking about this topic earlier on a call with Nick, he mentioned the same thing to me. And during that call in 5 minutes, I was able to produce the following call, which hopefully will be audible through my microphone for free. This cost me $0.
Hi, it's Joe Biden. Today is election day, and I'm calling to make sure all of my friends in Madison, Wisconsin get out and vote. And remember, due to a water main leak, your polling location has changed to 521 Main Street over in Fishburg.
So, not exactly hard to produce these things. And you could do that. Joe Biden's voice is readily available, but you could do that with 15 seconds of anyone's voice that you can get from an interview or a speech or what have you. So with that, hopefully that gives everybody a sense of the types of things we might see, and I'll stop there and pass it on to the next panelist.
Matt, terrifying and helpful. I'm gonna hand it over to Rob. And Rob, you are muted.
All right, you can see that okay? All right, thanks very much, Matt. I'm going to sort of quickly go over an overview of some of the threats that we've been talking about and elaborate on a couple others, and then hone in for a moment on what we can do about it. But I think this sort of diverse set of presentations gives you a worrisome insight into the complicated ways and novel ways. It's not just intensification of existing disinformation, but it's new threats or even existing threats that get transformed as they get filtered through or amplified by or altered by the use of generative AI. So I think this is a quick typology, certainly not comprehensive. I'm not going to talk about election administration since we just heard two troubling presentations on that. I'm going to take a moment on deepfakes discreetly, then elaborate a little bit on some of what Matt was just talking about with mis and disinformation, talk about targeted manipulation, which builds on some of the things that Nick was talking about, quickly mention a distinct problem, which we wanted to highlight, of the public comment process being distorted, and then focus again for a moment on some solutions. So I think that the prospect of deepfakes, especially video or pictorial deepfakes, is upon us. The video technology is pretty good. I think with the next year's time, it's going to be expertly good. We're starting to see campaigns using it, as in this illustration here from the DeSantis campaign. I think there's a couple sets of very specific worries. One is the launch of a deepfake right at around election time without chance for anybody to study it, refute it, and to have a decisive impact on a close election. A related worry is that the existence of deepfakes makes it possible for candidates to deny the authenticity of things that actually did happen. So I think this is not my original observation, I think if we were living in the deepfake world, the Access Hollywood tape had come out, Donald Trump would have just denied that it was true, instead of having to deal with the outcome of it or the pitfalls of it. He would just deny it was true, and that would have been a plausible claim given the reality of the deepfake technology that we're now dealing with. I think Matt just did a pretty good job of scaring us in terms of how mis and disinformation may work with existing technologies. I think some of the attributes that are so worrisome is that you can generate this stuff instantaneously and in quantity. So while we may have worried about disinformation in the past coming through social media, it was much more laborious and maybe involved humans sort of crafting messages. Now you can do it quickly at scale without human intervention, except maybe with an initial trigger, and relentlessly. And then you can do it as we were starting to see through these multiple channels. So it's way beyond just having a stream of bad content, misleading content being distributed over Twitter, X, or whatever. It's that then driving you to artificial websites of the kind we just saw that look like news, maybe complemented by individualized texts that are coming to you, generated by AI. And again, as we heard, maybe some robocalls as well that right now already are very convincing. We'll share out this PowerPoint with folks. If you want to really go down the rabbit hole, this is a deep research paper that elaborates a lot of these possibilities and more. And we'll do plenty to get you worried if you're not sufficiently worried by this webinar. I think we're also looking at, not maybe imminently, maybe not for 2024, but in the near term, an even deeper level of manipulation, which is targeted to individuals. Actually, Representative Buck was kind of getting at this, I think, in his remarks. If you combine the surveillance data that the platforms have, but not just the platforms, the data brokers and campaigns have, combine that with the ability to individually target and customize information using that data to individuals based on what a data source knows an individual wants. So in other words, the message that candidate Jones sends to Lisa Gilbert may be different than the message that candidate Jones sends to Robert Weissman based on the candidates and the campaign committee's knowledge about us. But it doesn't need a human being to generate that technology. It can come from the AI. And it doesn't have to just be text. And this is where we're going in the not distant future. It can be delivered by avatars that look an awful lot right now and sound an awful lot like right now as human beings. And in the near term, will probably be indistinguishable from real human beings. That avatar can be customized for you. So Lisa gets a different one than I get. And we have a prospect of deep, individualized, customized manipulation that is unlike anything we've experienced in politics or in society, really in history. And this is coming at us pretty fast. As a data scientist, Louis Rosenberg says, one thing that's notable about this, these are, although you may appear to be having a two-way conversation, it's a completely unequal one-way conversation. It's a human being with an AI, not with a real person. The AI, the source, has all the information on the person they're conversing with without any reciprocal information, without any ability for anybody engaged in that conversation to affect what the AI says, except to be further manipulated. And it happens in private. So unlike an ad that can be fact-checked, no one's going to even know this conversation happened. Or they may know it's happening theoretically, but they don't know each specific conversation. So no means for any accountability, and no possibility really of individualized fact-checking by outside sources. So quite troublesome prospects coming at us fast. Really quickly on the public comment process, we've had problems in the past with fake comments being submitted, and sort of this is when a regulation is being proposed, an agency asks the public to comment on it. Some problems already with that process being polluted by fake comments, but AIs offer the possibility of now polluting it not just with form comments, but with actually specific comments that come from people who appear to be real, but may be completely made up. That's a real problem. We think the solution to that doesn't involve making it harder for real people to offer comments, but actually requiring that commenters certify that they are real human beings, not fake human beings. There's a even broader thing that comes out of all this, which is the prospect of disintegration of social trust. We're obviously in a situation right now where we're polarized. There's mass discontent and disbelief in government and government authority. And people feel like society's kind of fraying at the edges with good reason. The polling data here just out from Pew shows that that's real. But if the information sources we get, not just through elections, but just in society, become very hard to believe in terms of truthfulness or authenticity, or whether they're coming from human beings at all, you're really at a loss as a citizen, as a consumer, as an individual in society. Very hard to know what you possibly can believe. And that's just going to lead to reinforcement and deepening of cynicism, polarization, and a conspiracy-minded culture. So what do we do? Well, obviously we need to do a lot. I think we're very interested in the power of disclosure as an immediate solution that goes a long way, not comprehensive, but goes a long way to mitigate a lot of the specific harms we're talking about. I know there's a question about First Amendment. We may talk about that more in terms of how you deal with AI-generated speech, but disclosure regimes applied generally, not to specific content, are going to be among the strongest things, most First Amendment protected ways to deal with AI challenges. And I think it's really vital now that we establish norms and standards and legal requirements around disclosure at this early age of generative AI. Disclosure gives people the chance to then recognize that something is synthetic and not real. It doesn't mean it doesn't solve all the problems, but it solves a lot of the problems, and it enables the individual to exercise their own judgment and to, I think, really mitigate some of the very sudden interruptive problems we might have, for example, from the introduction of a late election stage deep fake. It's not a perfect, and it can be evaded. There are enforcement challenges, but right now there's no requirement at all to disclose if something is synthetic or artificial. So we have to at least establish that baseline before we, yes, also worry about the enforcement problems, but first establish that baseline and draw some bright lines about what's illegal, particularly in the election context. And we think that's especially important in the context of deepfakes. As hopefully everyone on this call knows, Public Citizen has petitioned the Federal Election Commission to issue a rule prohibiting the use of deepfakes to the extent of their existing authority. Those links tell you how you can provide a comment in the comment period as a real human being, provide a comment in the comment period that's open for just about another month. We're also eager to have federal legislation, including legislation that's now been proposed or introduced by Senator Klobuchar. He'll be joining us to protect elections from Deceptive AI Act, which is a bipartisan proposal to prevent the use of deepfakes in elections. We, public citizen, are interested in exploring state options on this as well, and you can contact my colleague, Alana Beller, if you're interested in pursuing that in collaboration with us. And if you want more information, sort of elaborating on these multitude of threats and some broader sets of solutions, that last link will give you some useful information. With that, let me pass it over to you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Rob. So we are going to jump right into questions. We've gotten a ton of them from you all in the chat. If you have more, please dump them in. I want to invite Elise Weissman from Issue 1 Legislative Director to help moderate the questions. And Elise, I'll actually hand it to you to ask the first one.
Wonderful. Great to be here with you guys this morning. My first question is for Wesley. It's a combination of a question I had and one from Carl Smith in the chat here. Wesley, how prepared do you think local election officials are for the flow of misinformation that could be caused by AI? And I'm combining this with Carl's question here. Are there any ways or any ways that election officials could use these tools for good to get correct information out to voters and the public? Let us know your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Elise. And I think it was Carl who had the other part. Let me go with his question first. You know, we talked about a lot of the bad stuff that's available out of AI, but I've also started seeing products that are going to actually help with information dissemination. You know, a lot of us are familiar with going on somebody's website and hitting their chat bot of trying to get help, customer service, whatever else. If you don't know this about those, you know, they can only respond to a database list of questions. It's not a real person back there. They've got a database. And if you don't ask a question in their format, really, you're probably not going to get an answer. So I think there's an opportunity here from an election perspective to really build an interactive response mechanism to start providing accurate information from our website. I think we could set parameters to where, you know, it only pulls data that is physically on my website to provide those type of answers. And if not, at least get us back to somebody, a human that can. The other side of that is what can we do as elections officials to start battling some of the misinformation. And what it is we can't wait till the information becomes public. You know, we need to start building, you know, some trust relationships now. We can't wait until it becomes the narrative. The vast majority of us are suffering from a lack of local media coverage, whether it be in small, mostly in the small to medium jurisdictions. So as best we can, we need to find the most effective way to communicate with our voters. Just a quick anecdote. Just this past week, here in my office, I've seen a spike of vote by mail requests. And I was curious as to, you know, kind of what prompted this, because the elections office, my office, this past probably 6 months ago, we did a whole mailing to the entire population that had previously voted by mail to spark interest. And so, but I saw a spike this past weekend, and I was like curious what it was. Well, a local radio station had started running a news program, basically just stating that the vote by mails had expired. And I hadn't even really thought about going into that vein of using that, but it was a method, although the method that I used covered everybody. I know it did. Not everybody receives the message the same way, and not everybody receives it through the same medium. And so we need to start using everything at our disposal and not wait to respond. We've got to come in either at first notice, or better yet, get there first. You know, start talking about those things first off, get that trust relationship built long before we need it in November.
Thanks so much, Wesley. So I'm sure folks can see our closing speaker is here, Senator Klobuchar. So we are going to pause the panel questions. We're going to come back to them after her remarks. I just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, I'm sure folks know Senator Klobuchar is a huge democracy champion, helped to move the Freedom to Vote Act in the Senate, and of course, of late has been introducing bipartisan legislation to deal with AI in elections. So Senator Klobuchar, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for the introduction. And I want to thank Issue One and Public Citizen for leading the way when it comes to this critical issue. And it was fun hearing part of the panel there and some of the answers and seeing people I've worked with, including Commissioner Hicks, for many, many years. So this is something where we just can't wait. I think you know that there's a bipartisan group in Congress that I'm strongly supportive of, that Senator Schumer's involved, Rounds and Heinrich and Senator Young, and then a number of us that are working on particular issues. I don't think it is a surprise to you that I'm working on the emerging technology and how it will affect our voting, given my chairmanship of the Rules Committee and the work that we've done together on things like reforming the Electoral Count Act, and also the work that we'd like to see passed, the work we've done on the Freedom to Vote Act and the We the People Act, or For the People Act. So any emerging technology, yes, it has risk, but this one is in a special class. I think you know that we're concerned about security risks. We're in the increasing resilience of critical infrastructure to make sure we can guard against cyber attacks, to stay ahead of foreign adversary. It's also critical that we protect our innovation economy. There's a lot of discussion at that big meeting we had, which was quite fascinating. I kind of think of it as a meeting, even though it wasn't public, where they could have just done it with Schumer and McConnell. But luckily for us, they invited the rest of us, actually. So I was able to ask the first question, and you can imagine what it was about. It was about elections. And I'll get to that in a second. I just want to make sure that we don't get so focused on one thing that we don't see the big picture of why we need a broader bill. One is, I just already mentioned, the security. You don't want to have someone making it easier for them for cyber attacks or to make a chemical weapon. Secondly, the innovation economy on all of our minds, because people who produce content, blueprints, we can't have an innovation economy that thrives on protection of intellectual property. We can't have it stolen. And the third thing is scams. Yeah, we're going to see them in elections big time. But one of my employees' sons is serving in the Marines. She and her husband don't know where he is right now, but they got a scam scraped off his voice someone had from the platforms, and said that it was his voice saying he needed money immediately with a PO box. It was an obvious scam. We're going to see this kind of stuff all over the place. So that's another piece that we're focused on. But for me, the one thing is your number one thing, which is our democracy. So we are already seeing the technology being used to generate viral, misleading content to spread disinformation and deceive voters. For example, there was an AI-generated video posted on Twitter of one of my colleagues, Senator Warren, saying that members of the opposing party shouldn't vote. In her voice, you think it's her. She's saying Republicans shouldn't be able to vote. No, of course she didn't say that. She doesn't believe it. But the video was seen by nearly 200,000 Twitter users in 1 week. And AI-generated content has already begun to appear in political ads. Ron DeSantis ad showing a AI-generated photo of Trump hugging Fauci, which was not correct. Plus, new services like Banter AI have hit the market, which can create voice recordings that sound like President Biden and other elected officials, no matter what party they're from. This means that anyone with a computer can put words in the mouth of the leader of the free world. You can imagine the disasters that could cause in an emergency situation, or if people are told a hurricane is coming their way when it's not, or a disease there's been an outbreak when there's not, or there is and they say there isn't. This could be used to confuse voters about a candidate's policy position, either yours or your opponent's, and stoke extremism. And we can't control it unless we have rules for foreign adversaries getting involved. That's why we need the guardrails. Otherwise, the word of the President of the United States or his opponent would be meaningless. So what do we need? Well, the first thing for these things that are truly deep fakes, that aren't the person, AI generated fake candidate, that just has to be banned within the framework of the Constitution. So who did we join with? Senator Hawley, Senator Susan Collins, who, as you know, led the effort on the Electoral Reform Act bill we did, and Senator Coons. We've been joined now by Michael Bennett and Pete Ricketts. We've had lawyers from both parties review it, and it's called the Protect Elections from Deceptive AI Act. I felt it was very important, honestly, to have conservatives on this bill as well, or we're never going to be able to pass this. We're never going to be able to ban deepfakes. It prohibits the use of fraudulent AI-generated content in political ads. And as the 2024 elections are quickly approaching, we need to ensure that people are not deceived by political ads that falsely depict candidates, and voters deserve nothing less than full transparency. So that's one piece. Then for the other AI generated content, and by the way, with the first piece, we have an exception for satire and things like that, or we wouldn't be able to pass constitutional muster. Second piece, disclaimers. That's for the other AI generated content. That's a bill that Yvette Clarke is carrying in the House. I'm carrying it in the Senate with Senators Booker and Bennett. I'm also working with Republicans on this. We'll have to get Republicans to pass it, but it simply requires a disclaimer on political ads that include AI generated images or video. These are the ones that we wouldn't ban, so that voters know when AI is used in campaign ads. Finally, it's important that our government agencies, including the FEC, are doing their part in taking on the threats. While the FEC is now accepting public comments on whether it can regulate deceptive AI-generated campaign ads after deadlocking on the issue this summer, the Republican-appointed commissioners did say they wanted authority to be able to do that, and we have to take that seriously. So in addition to the other things, I'm working with a Republican across the aisle on legislation to do that, because we're just not going to be able to mess around. We can argue and maybe get to a place where, yeah, they can use it, but if they don't do it because they're deadlocked, what did we get? So I'm trying to be as practical and urgent on this as possible. I think, there's other things with voting places and getting things screwed up on AI that we'll deal with in different ways. But this is actually about the images of the candidates and the ads and the videos that are going to appear online. With the proper rules in place, we can harness the potential of AI while controlling the harms we're already seeing emerge. And no matter what, we cannot let the work of defending and strengthening our democracy fall by the wayside. We can't drag our heels when we have an emergent technology that is being used to peddle disinformation and mislead voters. Democracy itself is on the line. That's why I want to get this done, and Senator Schumer has committed to get this done ahead of some of the other efforts. So, because you imagine maybe it would be hard to pass these bills on like Super Tuesday, maybe. So we have to try to get them done beforehand and get them attached to something, at least some of them, by the end of the year. So that's my pledge to you and what we're up to. I'm sure you guys can think of 100 other better ideas, but I've kind of arrived at these only because there are sort of varying degrees of getting at what we have to get at. Some by the FEC, some hopefully by us with some real teeth with a bill that will work. It's a lot easier in some other countries, honestly. We're in our country and we love it. It's a lot easier in some countries that maybe have easier rules about elections and the way their court decisions have come out. We all know this is not going to be an easy road, but we must pass these bills. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator.
I'm here with Elizabeth, our staff director, working hard on it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. Appreciate you and your work.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that was inspiring. And to folks earlier in the chat who were talking about what we can do, she definitely gave us a bit of a roadmap. There is a lot to do. So let's jump right back into talking with our panel. We, again, have lots of great questions in the chat, so want to get to as many of them as we can before 12:30. The next one is for Commissioner Hicks. We've talked about this a bit through the panel, but just the fact that we are coming up on 2024 really fast. You've talked about some of the tools the EAC is developing. Just want to hear a little bit more about what you think should be happening on the ground, and then tying it to a question from someone in the chat, Jenny Lavelle, about the tools that we have, including, whether people are going to be using AI in any way for good, and how the EAC feels about that.
Well, thank you for the question. I think that there are a number of things that people can do. One, serve as a poll worker, be inside the offices to know what's going on and so forth, but also don't just forward something. I can't tell you how many of my family and friends have said, I saw this on A, B, or C, and it must be true, because why would they put it here if it wasn't? And I've been doing this for over 30 years. So, and they're not listening, but I'm trying my best. Other things I would say, these are going to be used because people will look, on, the day before the election, where do I vote? Because people wait until the last minute on things, and they will Google that. And what will appear is what we hope is that the correct sites that go about. But what we at the EAC are doing is we're pushing out to say, go directly to the sources. Do not just go to Google, go to your local election offices to find that information. Where do you vote? How do you vote? What ID you need to bring, if any, and other eligibilities as well. So, we're going to do all we can. And this is a bipartisan effort. This is not something that is just, the two Democrats are pushing to say, we need to do more of this, but it's all four of us, the two Ds, the two Rs, and we're in locked unison to say that this is going to be something that's going to be something that we are going to have to deal with for 24 and beyond, in all aspects, not just elections.
Thanks, Tom. Want to hand it to Elise for the next question.
Thanks, Lisa. This question is for Matt. It's from Paul S. Ryan in the chat. It's about the voluntary safeguards or voluntary measures that some of the platforms are taking themselves. Most recently, Google announced a policy that beginning in November 2023, political ads containing AI-generated images, video, or audio are going to have to disclose that to viewers. Matt, what are your overall thoughts about these voluntary measures being taken by some platforms? Any concerns with enforcement around that or loopholes?
Sure. So I think what we've seen, misinformation is not a new problem. It's a growing problem, and there have been numerous measures announced by Google and Facebook and others that are all aimed at least ostensibly aimed at reducing misinformation. And unfortunately, I think what we've seen is that there's really a lot of variation in whether they're enforced at all, or how well they're enforced. And so, to take, for example, even after our team did some reporting on this, but even after some of the big platforms like Facebook and Twitter announced guardrails around, vaccine misinformation and other major categories of misinformation over the past couple of years, they got a nice press release out of it. They got some PR, but at least all of our research found that that kind of content was still quite prevalent. Now in ads, Google very well may successfully implement that particular guardrail in paid ads, labeling the majority of AI produced media. But that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, because there's lots of ways to amplify this content that are not through paid ads. And so, I'm a little skeptical of the capability to even catch everything in the paid ads, but there are so many other places. Like, the much bigger problem is this stuff being disseminated on content platforms, social media platforms, et cetera, all of which are kind of not incentivized to reduce the spread of misinformation, because engagement is how they, their business model is based on engagement, and misinformation engages quite well. So, I do think there are positive steps that tech platforms can take. They can, we've seen some cases, we do a lot of work with Microsoft, for example, which is used third-party data like ours and other groups that are fact-checking that are, for example, if you use the Bing Chat AI tool, you'll see that it's much less likely to engage with you and repeat misinformation topics if you try to make it, and it'll cite fact-checker data or our data as part of refusing to do that. So I think there are steps that tech platforms can take, and we haven't seen it be done effectively across the whole industry, but anything is better than nothing. But I do think there's going to need to be a lot more of that to really make a dent in the problem.
Thanks, Matt. So one more question, which is slated for Wesley, but I think Commissioner Hicks could answer as well, from Chip Kennedy. So just the promise in AI to help put out correct information, better election website chatbots, for example. The question is about support or budget at election boards or at the federal level for that kind of work, for that kind of civic engagement effort to invest in better technologies.
If it's okay with Commissioner Hicks, I'll start. I was literally typing a response to Chip. I saw it here, and so I've already kind of thought a little bit about it. The reality budget-wise, that's a challenge. Every dollar that we as elections office have, are in today's world hard fought. And providing preventive maintenance on some of these other items, whether I recognize that it's absolutely necessary, but also it's also absolutely necessary that I have that full-time person inside here that's responding to vote by mail requests and running a tabulation machine and doing the FTE stuff that's in here. Elections are woefully underfunded. And, you're seeing, if you see myself and some of my colleagues across and doing these, we're fortunate that we're some of the better funded organizations. A lot of my colleagues across the state are considered, fiscally constrained. And I know of a jurisdiction where the choice becomes, do we buy a new ambulance for emergency management, or can I put in a server that does this? And the reality is, what that choice is going to be. So I'll try to stop there and turn over to Commissioner Hicks for any final stuff.
No, I think that's a great answer. The only thing I would add is that when I first got to the EAC back in 2015, our budget was about $10 million, and it's gone up to about 28 million. That's a great increase, but it's still lower than if you add for inflation, where we were in 2010. Elections have not been funded well. In 2020, we all remember the pandemic. But Congress came together and gave millions of dollars to get to election officials quickly on an issue that they felt was very important to ensure that safety was done for people who wanted to vote in person, and for providing mail-in ballots for folks who wanted to vote using that option. This is a very important issue that's going to affect the election overall. And so Congress needs to hear from folks. When I worked on the Hill, we didn't really take up issues that we didn't hear from folks on. So if you want this to be a true issue, Congress needs to hear from you to increase that money to get to election officials, because most election offices are not like LA County that has 1,000 FTEs. They have 1 or 2 people. And I say this all the time. When we were dealing with foreign influence of elections, if Russia parked a nuclear sub off the coast of Virginia, we wouldn't say, hey, Virginia, go deal with that. We would say, hey, US Navy, federal government, go deal with that. So we need to provide resources for the federal election that's coming up in 2024. And so I asked the 120 26 people who are on this call to, advocate for that.
Thanks to you both. So we are at time. I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone who participated today, to Representative Buck, to Senator Klobuchar, our incredible panel, our partner in pulling this together, Issue 1. Close by saying, many issues concerning generative AI are complicated, but the threats to democracy from deepfakes and other misinformation and everything we discussed today are not. We need Congress and regulators to act. We need more resources, as we just said, to combat the problems. We need more awareness and engagement. So really appreciate how many people joined today to that end. And we'll continue to work on the topic, and we hope to work with all of you. So thanks so much for being with us, and appreciate you all. Have a great day.